If you enjoy this type of content, subscribe to the channel and leave a like to be part of the community. Now let's get started.
No one in the savannah expected to see that. A vervet monkey infant, less than 2 months old, trying to roar in the middle of the tall grass of the Amboseli Plain. The sound that came out was a mixture between a sneeze and a high-pitched squeak, but he tried again, and again, with all the seriousness in the world. The 2 lion cubs beside him watched without exactly understanding what to do with that strange creature that insisted on imitating everything they did. 3 weeks earlier, no one would have been able to say how Kiko had gotten there. The drought of 2023 had turned Amboseli into something unrecognizable. Rivers that lasted all year became cracks in the earth. Entire herds changed route without warning. And in the chaos of these migrations, the smallest were the first to get lost. That was what happened to Kiko. His family had been scattered during a night of panic, when a dust storm covered everything and separated those who were together. By morning, he was alone, disoriented, hungry. It was Sarah who found him. Sarah was a 7-year-old lioness, known by the park rangers as a solitary hunter since she lost her 2 cubs at the beginning of that season. She had been seen wandering for days, with a behavior that researchers described as grief. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, she appeared at the observation camp with a monkey infant by her side, and her 2 new cubs, Runo and Lebo, sniffing the creature with great cautious curiosity. The researchers stayed awake that night, trying to understand what they had witnessed. There was something different in the way Sarah looked at Kiko. It was not the look of someone assessing prey. It was another kind of look. Anyone who has ever had a child would recognize that expression from a distance. In the following days, Kiko began to sleep leaning against Sarah, to play with Runo and Lebo, and to observe everything the lion cubs did with an attention that seemed almost scientific. He wanted to learn, and he did, in his own way, with results that would make anyone stop and look twice. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us in the comments what you thought and which city or country you're watching from. The first week was a study in contradictions. Kiko did not understand why the lion cubs walked so slowly when they could simply jump from branch to branch. Runo and Lebo did not understand why that noisy creature insisted on climbing everything, including on Sarah's back, who accepted the weight with a patience that surprised even the most experienced researchers at the camp. Dr. Amara Osei, a primatologist who had been monitoring the region for 4 years, was the first to document Sarah's behavior with Kiko in a systematic way. She had studied dozens of lions in Amboseli, but had never seen anything remotely similar. Sarah not only tolerated the monkey, she actively protected him. When a hyena approached the group on a Wednesday morning, Sarah positioned herself in front of Kiko even before shielding her own cubs. Amara wrote in her field notebook, she treats him as her 3rd cub. What no one could explain was why Sarah had made that choice from the very first moment. She was an experienced hunter. She knew how to distinguish prey from companion. And yet, the instant she found Kiko dehydrated among the rocks, something in her changed permanently. Amara had a theory about what had happened, but she preferred not to say it out loud yet. Meanwhile, Kiko watched everything. He watched Runo and Lebo learn to crawl through the grass and try to do the same, with disastrous results, because monkeys were not made to crawl. He watched the cubs growl to practice intimidation and release his own sound, that sneeze squeak that quickly became the camp's comedic soundtrack. The rangers stopped recording the phenomenon with scientific seriousness the 3rd time they heard it, and simply laughed until it hurt. But there was one moment of the day when no one laughed. Every sunset, when the sun began to sink behind the acacias, Kiko stopped everything. He became completely still for a few seconds, staring fixedly at the horizon. The researchers noticed this pattern as early as the 2nd week. It was always at the same time, always in the same direction, northeast. Amara knew what that meant. Instinct does not disappear. It sleeps for weeks, even months, but it does not disappear. Sarah seemed to know as well, because in those moments, she would always approach slowly and stand beside Kiko, doing nothing, just present, as if she knew that peace would not last forever. In the fourth week, Kiko did something none of the researchers expected. He began to teach. Not deliberately, of course, but Runo and Lebo started following him to the trees, watching how he climbed, how he used his hands to hold fruit, how he moved between the branches with a lightness that the lion cubs would never be able to reproduce. They tried anyway. Lebo managed to climb 1/2 meter up a slanted trunk before slipping and falling sideways into the grass, looking at Kiko with an expression that could only be described as completely betrayed. Kiko climbed down, sniffed his brother's head, and climbed back up. Amara filmed that scene and spent the night watching it again. It was not just adaptation. It was something bidirectional. Kiko was learning to be a lion, and the lion cubs were learning, unintentionally, to be a little less lion. The group had created its own language, made of gestures, sounds, and a mutual tolerance that challenged any animal behavior manual she had ever read. But what Amara had not yet told anyone was what she had discovered about Sarah. 3 years earlier, park records showed that Sarah had been separated from her own pride while still young, during a previous drought. She spent months alone before being reintegrated. Amara had cross-referenced these data with the current behavior and reached a conclusion that left her silent for an entire afternoon. Sarah had not adopted Kiko despite her history. She had adopted him because of it. While Amara's theory matured in her notebook, Kiko continued his routine with a dedication that bordered on absurd. He had developed his own roar, technically still a squeak, but with a different cadence, lower, more intentional. When Runo and Lebo roared, Kiko responded. The group would fall silent for a second, as if processing the sound, before continuing to play normally. The Rangers called it the daily meeting. It was during one of these meetings, on a clear morning, that Ranger Kofi Mensah spotted something on the northeastern horizon. A cloud of dust, small still, but moving in their direction with a steadiness he recognized immediately. Heard on the move. He picked up the radio slowly, without taking his eyes off the dust, and called Amara in the voice of someone who already knows that everything is about to change. The herd arrived at the end of the following afternoon. There were 11 vervet monkeys, moving in a tight group across the open grass, with that characteristic agitation of those who have traveled far and are close to something familiar. Amara identified them by the pattern of facial markings while still holding the binoculars, unable to write anything down because her fingers simply would not obey properly. Among them, an adult female who moved differently from the others, faster, more restless, stopping every few meters to sniff the air with an urgency that needed no explanation at all. It was Kiko's biological mother. Amara was certain even before seeing his reaction. Kiko was about 40 meters away when the wind changed direction. He stopped in the middle of a jump between two branches, hung suspended for an absurd instant, and landed slowly. He turned his head. His nostrils moved in a way completely different from anything the researchers had recorded until then.
You know, your like helps this video reach more people who also enjoy this topic. If you're enjoying it, click there and subscribe to the channel. By the way, I'm curious, what do you think of the video? Leave your comments and tell us your country or city.
Runo and Lebo noticed a change in him before they noticed the herd. What happened in the following minutes was recorded by 3 different cameras, and even so Kofi later said that no image captured it properly. Kiko's mother saw him. She released a sound that Amara described in the report as infant recognition vocalization, but that anyone with a beating heart would understand without needing to read any report at all. Kiko did not run. He stood still, looking at his biological mother, then at Sarah, then at his mother again. Runo pressed his muzzle against his shoulder. Lebo stayed on the other side, doing nothing, just present. exactly as Sarah did at sunsets. Sarah watched everything from a higher point, completely motionless. Then something happened that no one had predicted. Kiko's mother moved forward toward the group, and Sarah did not retreat. The two stood less than 3 meters from each other, in a silence that lasted long enough for Amara to hold her breath until it hurt. There was no attack. There was no escape. There was something far more difficult to name. A negotiation without words between two mothers. Kiko looked at Sarah one last time. She lowered her head slowly, not in submission, but in something that looked very much like a nod from someone who understands that the time has come. He took his first steps toward the herd with his eyes still turned back, and Sarah led him. In the days that followed, the camp became quieter. It was not exactly a sad silence. It was more the kind of silence that comes after something big, when people are still processing what they have seen and have not found the right words. Kofi swept the observation area 3 times in the same day without realizing it. Amara stared at the notes in her notebook for an hour without writing a single line. Bruno and Lebo kept playing, but sometimes they would stop and look at the nearby trees as if expecting to see something climb down. Sarah slept more than usual, what no one expected, and what Amara recorded with an emotion that seeped into the scientific report in ways she did not try to hide, was what happened on the morning of the 12th day after Kiko's departure. He came back, not to stay. That was clear from the very first moment, because the herd was a few meters behind, waiting at the edge of the grass. But he came back. He walked straight to Sarah, who was lying in the shade of an acacia, and stood in front of her for a length of time that Kofi timed at almost 4 minutes. Sarah did not get up. She only opened her eyes and kept looking at him. Kiko released his sound, that deep squeak the rangers called a roar, a single time. Then he pressed his forehead against her muzzle for a few seconds. Bruno came closer, and the two sniffed each other as they had done since the first week. Lebo stayed to the side, watching with that expression that had not changed much since the episode of the slanted trunk. Then Kiko left. Amara published the case in a scientific journal 6 months later. The article was read in 43 countries. She did not try to explain everything. She wrote in the final paragraph that some things happen in nature that science can document, but is not obligated to reduce. What Sarah did for Kiko was not an instinctive mistake. It was a choice. And what Kiko did in coming back was not identity confusion. It was gratitude. Family is not only who was there at the beginning. It is who stayed when you needed it most, and who you choose not to forget even after life moves on. Tell us in the comments what you thought of this story and which city or country you are watching from. And if you have not yet subscribed to the channel or liked the video, this is the moment.